We're closing in on the end of the month, and with Evolving Skies having come out not too long ago, Fusion Strike being introduced really recently, it's tough to know what deck you should be playing or even just what the best decks are, and that's what we're going to tackle in this video. And I've never done this before, so I'm excited to do it. Hey everybody, Nick from 9Card TCG, and today we are making our very first tier list using data from play.limitlesstcg.com, link to that in the video description, and also just my own opinions on how these decks perform, especially when you take into consideration how they play against each other. So I guess with all that said, I want to preface it by again emphasizing a lot of this is my opinion. We have not had that many major tournaments with Fusion Strike legal, and over the next month or two before Brilliant Stars comes out in February, this list is likely to change, so don't take this as written in stone, right? The decks are going to move very frequently up and down this tier list. Also, I forgot to mention, so I'm doing this after, I'm just kind of posting this somewhere in this video. All of the decks that you're going to see, not all of them, right, but most of the decks, especially the really good and popular decks, I do have deck lists for on PokemonCard.io, and I have a link to my profile in the video description, so you can go check out all the different deck lists. I thought it would be easier to just do the tier list and let you look at the decks that you want. Maybe there's someone else that you go to for deck building and all that kind of stuff, but deck lists are there. Enjoy. So here is our tier list, and you can see this blue curve. Well, what is this? If you're not familiar with normalized bell curves, well, this is exactly what that is. It is a bell curve. And what a bell curve tells you is the frequency in which data appears. You're going to have an average, the most common number, and that is this peak on the far right. And as you get to the ends where it says BDIF and you have the number 3, those are the least common or extremes. So as you can imagine, during this tier list that we're making, very few decks are going to end up at BDIF or BIF or BDIF. How do people say? That's weird. Best deck. Very few decks are going to end up at best deck in format, and very few decks are going to end up in 3. They're all mostly going to be in the 1.5, 2 category, right? Most of these decks are pretty good. So I guess let's start placing some decks, and you'll see how it kind of fits that actual bell curve. But I'm going to take it away just so it doesn't influence us too much. So starting this list with Dragapult. Dragapult was the best deck in format, but I think right now it's kind of in that tier 1.5. Can you still do well with it? Absolutely, but the number of dark decks running around, particularly Single Strike Urshifu, does make this a difficult choice for some tournaments. Gengar is also another popular deck, and you being weak to dark, and that is almost exclusively dark, gives you a little bit of a tough time. Jolteon kind of suffers from the same weakness as Dragapult in that Single Strike or even Rapid Strike Urshifu matchup, being weak to fighting. It is a difficult weakness to have. Again, Single Strike Urshifu is one of the most popular decks in the game at the moment, so running into a lot of fighting is challenging, but you do have advantage over Suicune, which is a very good deck. You do have weakness over something like Rapid Strike Inteleon VMAX, which is a nice weakness to be hitting for. So it is a good deck, and you can also snipe some really good damage. Even Single Strike Urshifu, honestly, if it doesn't get rolling quick enough, Jolteon can start taking out those Houndours before they evolve, and now you're stuck trying to manually attach while just getting sniped into oblivion. So even though it is weak to fighting, Single Strike Urshifu is not necessarily an auto win. I'll admit it, I've lost to Jolteon before. It's one of those things that happen. Boltund VMAX is going to kind of fall into that 2 category. It suffers from the same weakness as Jolteon, but it doesn't have the sniping capabilities, and because you're relying on Flaffies to accelerate energies to the bench, it's not as bad as something like Rayquaza, where you have to attack with the energies on that Pokemon. Boltund has the Bolt Storm attack, which accounts for all energies in play which is really, really nice. So you can just accelerate energies to any of your Boltons on the bench and still hit with an active and not have to worry too much. But being everything in that fight, being everything in that deck weak to fighting, and also it could just be tricky to set up, is kind of puts it at a lower tier. Decidueye, I'm not sure if it's 2 or 3. I'm kind of leaning more towards 3. It's a very good card, and I hate to see it so low, but so many decks just run options to handle Decidueye. There's so much sniping that they can destroy your Decidueyes before they get set up. So I can't really recommend Decidueye at the moment, but who knows, you can enter a tournament with Decidueye and take some people by surprise. Duraludon VMAX, I think, is a tier 2 deck, and tier 2 does not mean bad, it just means that at this moment it's not the best call for most tournaments, but again, you can still do well with Duraludon. The thing about Duraludon is that its ability is amazing. The Skyscraper ability prevents all damage from your opponent's Pokemon with any special energy attached, and there's a lot of special energy going around. Horror Psychic Energy, Single Strike Energy, Rapid Strike Energy, Fusion Strike Energy, all this kind of stuff. Now, Mew VMAX and Single Strike Urshifu do have attacks to kind of ignore weakness, or that ability to ignore the ability of Skyscraper, but Mew VMAX doesn't really do as much damage as you want it to, and Single Strike is the real problem. But the Gmax Pulverization lets you go through opposing Pokemon with similar abilities, so really, really good card overall. Just a little clunky to get set up at the moment. Eternatus is another tier 2 deck. It suffers from the fighting weakness, and it's a really difficult play. I mean, with something like Mew VMAX, it's better because Mew is very common. Depending on the tournament, Mew VMAX would be the most common deck. Single Strike Urshifu is the most common deck, so you can still do pretty well with Eternatus. It's just one of those things that, unless you're hitting it for weakness, it doesn't have the damage output to really take out most VMAXs in one shot, and you're going to get one shot by a fighting V, so it's a difficult battle in that sense, but you can still do pretty well against some decks. Genesect Toxtricity is okay. I've played it before. I had fun doing it, and I took some wins that I probably shouldn't have. However, again, it's a little clunky to get set up, and the Techno Blast not being able to use it next turn means you're constantly trying to rotate through your Genesects, and it could just be a little difficult and a little awkward at times, but if you could pull it off, you definitely can get some wins. We're just going to move Boltund to the end here because I think it's the worst of the tier 2, and let's go on to Gengar VMAX. Tier 1.5, mostly because you're hitting Psychic decks for weakness, and you have all the benefits of Single Strike, like energy acceleration from the deck, and bumping up that damage so that even if you're not going against a Psychic deck, you can still hit for some serious damage. Do I think it was always tier 1.5? I mean, it really depends on what's available in that tournament, what you're playing against. Decks like Suicune, you're going to have a little bit of a tough time with. Decks like even Rapid Strike or Single Strike Urshifu, because you're weak to fighting, you're going to have a difficult time. Gengar VMAX, while a Gale Thrust won't one-shot you, if you've accelerated any energies using Single Strike Roar, now it will. So it's a little bit difficult to play, but you can definitely do well with it, and we've seen people like Zach Lasage do well with Gengar, so it's possible, and I'm going to give it a little bit higher rating than some others might. Leafeon, I think at the moment, is a little bit better than Dragapult, mostly because of how popular Single Strike is, and this is Single Strike's worst matchup. There was some Trainer Hill data from really recent that showed Single Strike loses to Leafeon about 60-something% of the time. So really, really tough matchup for Single Strike. So if you're tired of going against all those Urshifus and you want to take them down, this is the deck to use. And it does well against other decks too, because you're just hitting for consistent amounts, and with all the Shady Dealing search and everything, that you can really stack on the damage pretty easily. As much as it pains me to say it, I do think Mew VMAX is probably the best deck in the game at the moment. It's just very consistent, very fast. The energy acceleration from things like Elisa Sparkle and the attack, I forget what it is, the Fusion Strike copy attack, where you can copy any of your Fusion Strike Pokemon on the bench. You can copy their attack. Really, really good. It hits Urshifu for weakness, so that's really upsetting. But it's just a really solid deck. Dynamax, what is it? Dynamax Barrier, something like that. On the Latias, the ability that prevents damage from your opponent's Pokemon VMAXs. I mean, look at everything on this. Leafeon VMAX, Dragapult VMAX, Jolteon, Gengar, Boltund. I mean, the only thing so far on this list that's not a VMAX is Genesect. So, and I guess Decidueye if someone's playing that, but don't, because Mew VMAX can hit through Deep Forest Camo. So, not really a good option. Inteleon, I think, is probably the best of the tier 2. I haven't seen enough of it to really doing well to me to place it higher. You could definitely get some solid wins with it. It's not a bad deck by any means. I want to see it performing well before I start to place it higher. We're getting into our tier 1 decks, and Rapid Strike Urshifu Melanie is it's a tier 1 deck. It's very, very good. It's very consistent. It's going to hit a couple of these things like Gengar and Jolteon for weakness. It's going to hit Eternatus for weakness, Boltund for weakness. Not that you're really seeing much of Eternatus and Boltund at the moment, but they're just the snipe power with Gmax Rapid Flow and being able to do it back-to-back turns with Melanie is very, very powerful. I mean, you're taking out Pokemon Vs, 2 Pokemon Vs with back-to-back Rapid Flows for 4 prizes, and then you can just Gale Thrust a Crobat to take your final 2. You're in a really good position. It's a solid deck. Sableye and Galarian Weezing is a really interesting pick, and it really was kind of pushed forward by Celio, Luke of Celio's network. It was not something I really considered too much of. But it can do really well, and it has done well. And I think that the neutralizing gas ability is so strong, because how many of these decks rely on things like Inteleon to really function or to be at the core of their deck? I mean, Inteleon, Dynamax Barrier, Skyscraper, Eternatus is all abilities. I mean, even Single Strike Urshifu requires the Single Strike Roar from Houndoom to really function at max capacity. So being able to turn off all those abilities is very, very powerful. Shadow Rider, I'm kind of putting in tier 2 just because, again, it hasn't really performed very well recently. You haven't seen too much of it. It's a good deck. It just suffers from getting hit by Dark types, and Dark types are really common and popular at the moment, so it's a little hard to justify playing Shadow Rider in major events. Can you get wins? Absolutely, it can do really well. It can beat some really good decks because of the Alcremie. It allows you to attack into Urshifus and Umbreons or Gengars without getting hit for weakness next turn, because it's not weak to Dark, it's weak to Metal. So using Alcremie is really important for Shadow Rider at the moment, but still want to see it doing better before I start placing it higher. But it is a very good deck. Again, all of these decks are good in their own right. It's just, is it the right call at the moment? Single Strike Urshifu is just, and this is of course the Umbreon, Single Strike Urshifu Umbreon, one of the best decks in the game. I mean, before Mew VMAX came out, it was the best deck temporarily, but it's still a very good choice and extremely popular in most tournaments, and it's my deck of choice. It's the deck that I play the most, and I love it very much. Suicune and Greedent is not particularly good. I mean, can you get some wins off of it? Absolutely, but you're probably just riding on Suicune's coattails. The Greedent's really not going to add too much. It's a meme deck. Again, when you hit Turn a Profit to take 3 prizes on a Sobble, it's absolutely incredible highlight reel, but it's not worth it. You might as well just play Suicune. Speaking of playing Suicune, I think the Ice Rider Suicune variant is really good, but honestly, the Suicune Ludicolo version is probably better, and I think it's probably better than Rapid Strike Urshifu at the moment, mostly because it gives Single Strike a tough time, and it can even give Mew a tough time, because you're just benching so many Pokemon that you're hitting Mew for really good damage, and if you're going first or they're not able to evolve right away into their Mew VMAX, then you can easily get ahead on prizes, and before you know it, it's just too late for Mew to come back. Rapid Strike Sylveon Box, I think is a good deck. I do kind of like it. It suffers from the same issues that every box deck has, is that you get a couple of pieces here and there, but it might not be enough pieces or the right pieces to kind of get everything going when you need to. You suffer a little bit from that. Togekiss, I mean, can you win? Yeah, one of the Fernandez brothers did well with Togekiss, but and I don't know why I'm saying Togekiss. I always say Togekiss, but now I'm really emphasizing that GE. But so whatever. I guess I'm a fraud. Togekiss, it can do well. I just don't think it's. I just don't see it. I just don't. But maybe I'm not good enough. I don't know. This is trash. Don't play it. Victini, I think it kind of falls in this range. I'm gonna say here, only because Victini has the energy disruption of Rugged Helmet and Fan and Hammers and all that kind of stuff, and that can be really annoying for a lot of decks. But decks like Suicune that run Melanie, decks like even Rapid Strike Urshifu that runs Melanie, where you get rid of an energy, fine, I'll just Melanie it back, or I can Rapid Strike Search next turn to get the Rapid Strike energy you used your Fan of Waves from, so it's not that big a deal. It can be, annoying to deal with, but overall, Victini, I mean, that's all the deck is Victini and energy disruption. And if you're playing Suicune, you're probably losing to type weakness. Zoroark Control, I want to put here, not because I think it's a bad deck, I just think most people don't know how to play it very well. I don't know how to play it at all, and as a result, I'm going to do really poorly with it, and I think a lot of people will do really poorly with it. It takes a different type of person to play Control, and if you do well with it, you will do well with it. But for the most part, I don't think many people are going to pilot this deck or use it the right way to get maximum results out of it. Finally, Zacian Zamazenta. I do think it's a very good deck. It actually recently won a pretty big tournament. I'm going to put it here, mostly because it's just a very easy deck to play. There's not a lot to it. It's get your Zacians in play and threaten that turn 2 Brave Blade. Use your Oranguru and Rotom Phones to kind of help you do that, and maybe throw a Zamazenta on the bench just to say, hey, if you bring out a VMAX, I'm gonna stall until I can, take care of that VMAX, or I'm gonna just start discarding all your special energies with Assault Tackle, and now you can't do anything. So there you go with the actual tier list. How do we do in terms of our bell curve? Well, let's take a look. Here's our bell curve. We have to shift it over a little bit, but yeah, for the most part, like I said, it was going to fall in that tier 1 tier. This is probably, yeah, I would say this is really, really good. It's what you expect from a bell curve. I mean, obviously, if we have the more decks we have, the more closely you're going to fall into that actual curve. With a limited number of decks like this, yeah, it's expected to be a little choppy, but that's just how this kind of stuff goes. That's going to do it for us today. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this video, found it a little informative. If you did, don't be afraid to hit the subscribe button and bell notification so you never miss another video. And I'm going to be doing this a little bit more frequently, maybe every couple of weeks, just to kind of keep track of what's doing well and what you may want to look to play with, or what decks you're likely to be playing against in your next tournament. So that's going to do it. If you enjoyed this, like I said, subscribe, hit the like, comment, all that kind of stuff. Let me know what decks you would put where. If you disagree with me anywhere, I definitely want to know in the comments, because I'm not always right. At least that's what my wife tells me. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.